Hi, I'm Maris. I was on a business trip halfway across the world when my father called, voice trembling, said Mom had been in a car crash. She was in the ER, needed emergency surgery, needed money. I gave him the safe code, dropped everything, flew home. But when I opened the front door, she was standing in the kitchen, cooking spaghetti, perfectly fine. And the safe? Empty. $9 million. Gone. But here's what they didn't know. The code I gave him wasn't real, and the moment they forged my name, they wrote their own ending. So, tell me, what would you do if the people who raised you were the ones who buried you? Before we begin, what time are you listening to this, and where from? Drop it in the comments. This story isn't just mine. I was halfway through a high-stakes negotiation in Tokyo when my phone buzzed. My assistant tried to catch my eye, signaling I shouldn't pick it up. But the name flashing on the screen, Dad, made my chest tighten. Calder never called unless someone died, or worse, needed something. I stepped outside the glass-walled conference room into the quiet hallway. I could hear my heels clicking, but it all blurred when I heard his voice. Maris, it's your mom. She's been in an accident. They rushed her to the ER. It's serious. They need money for treatment, now. I didn't even ask what happened. I didn't ask why he sounded so unfamiliar in his concern. I didn't question how he knew which hospital or what kind of accident. My hand trembled as I told him, "The safe code is 9261. I'll be on the next flight." He mumbled a thank you that barely sounded human. I hung up and stood still. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the dread crawl under my skin. Then I walked back in, apologized to the stunned boardroom in perfect Japanese, and left behind a deal I'd spent 2 years stitching together. I didn't care. I had to get home. 15 hours, 1 airport hotel nap, and 3 emails from my legal team later, I stood in the driveway of my family's house in Los Angeles. The house hadn't changed. The roses my mom planted were still trimmed into those silly spirals she loved. For a woman who was supposedly half dead in an ER, she sure kept her landscaping tight. I opened the front door, and there she was, my mother. In the kitchen, stirring a pot of marinara sauce, humming, wearing her apron, that same stained kiss the cook apron she's had since I was 10. She turned, surprised, or pretending to be. "Oh, Maris, honey, what are you doing here?" I blinked. I hadn't even put my bags down yet. "Dad said you were in an accident." Her brows lifted. "An accident? What accident?" I was frozen. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I walked into the hallway. The floorboards creaked just like always. I turned toward the study. The safe was still tucked behind the bookshelf. Wide open. Empty. Every cent. The $9 million I'd stashed away over 15 years of work, investments, consulting, sleepless nights, gone. No mess. No break-in. Just gone. When I came back to the kitchen, Mom was rinsing spinach. Dad sat at the dining table reading the sports section like nothing had happened. Seren, my sister, wandered in, tossing her car keys on the counter. BMW. New. I hadn't seen that model before. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from Calder. He didn't look up. That was his way of saying, "You're not owed an explanation." Seren looked me up and down. "Tokyo didn't work out?" "Not exactly," I replied, keeping my voice even. Mom chirped, "I thought you were flying in next month." I didn't answer. It hit me then, the quiet choreography. The way everyone avoided looking too long. The fake surprise. They knew. But they didn't know I'd planned for this moment long ago. That safe code? It wasn't the real one. It was a secondary code I set up after the last time. I learned. And this time, I left them thinking they won. That night, I unpacked my bag in my childhood room. Tucked between two blouses was a white cloth napkin folded into a swan. My mother must have slipped it in while packing me lunch last visit. "For luck," she said back then. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at it. Did she know? Was she in on it? Or just playing along like she always had? I couldn't tell anymore. The next morning over coffee, I looked her straight in the eyes. "Mom, were you really in the hospital last Tuesday?" Her spoon paused mid-stir. Just for a beat. Her smile twitched. "You're imagining things again, honey." And that was when I knew. She lied. To my face. Like it was nothing. She lied to my face. And in that moment I knew. I wasn't the daughter. I was the outsider. So I did what I've always done when the truth hurts more than I can show. I went quiet. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. Fog hung low in the backyard like the world was holding its breath. I stood in the hallway outside the kitchen, staring at the soft reflection of myself in the hallway mirror. I didn't recognize that woman. Her jaw clenched too tight. Her eyes held a storm. But I smiled anyway and stepped into the kitchen like nothing had cracked. Mom offered me scrambled eggs, humming to herself like she hadn't just erased 20 years of trust with a lie. Saren was already at the table, flipping through her phone, looking bored. She had that new car smell smugness, you know, that glow people wear when they've just done something shady and think they got away with it. "I forgot how early you wake up," she said, sipping her orange juice without looking at me. "I didn't sleep much," I said. Which was true. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I'd been the family's safety net without realizing it. Dad came in a few minutes later, grunting some version of good morning. He sat down with the newspaper like this was any other Tuesday, like he hadn't used a fake emergency to drain the safe of every cent I'd built. Mom asked if I wanted toast. I said sure. She placed it in front of me like she was proud of something. We all smiled too much that morning. Tight-lipped, polite, distant smiles. It was almost peaceful, until my phone buzzed in my lap. "Wire transfer complete." I didn't move, just blinked at the screen. I hadn't approved anything. I slid the phone under the table and checked the account. $150,000 gone. Sent to a name I didn't recognize, just a string of letters and numbers and a bank I'd never used. "Everything okay?" Serene asked. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. I smiled back. "Just work," she laughed. "You still do that?" I didn't answer. I looked down at my plate, untouched. That's when I heard it. Her voice, floating through the hallway as she stepped outside to take a call. No, listen, I told you it had to be early. Yeah, the title's not under my name, obviously. Just shut up and enjoy the car, okay?" A pause. "Relax. She won't do anything. She never does." That was it. The words didn't even sting. They landed like facts. Seren never thought I'd fight back. And maybe that's on me. Maybe I'd spent too many years trying to keep the peace. Maybe I made it too easy for them to see me as the reliable one. The silent bank account. The daughter who'd always show up but never speak up. I went upstairs, sat at the desk in my old bedroom and pulled out my legal pad, the same one I used for high-stakes cases, but this time the stakes were me. I wrote their names. Calder, Seren, and now, possibly Mom. I made 2 columns. Actions. Motives. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't messy. It was orchestrated. And they counted on me being too stunned to react. That's when I remembered the security system. I logged into the admin panel from my tablet. It was still synced to the house. The logs showed that the system had been disabled at exactly 3:12 p.m. on the day of the accident. Accessed manually. By fingerprint. Calder's. I stared at the screen so long, my vision blurred. Then I printed it. I added it to my growing folder. It wasn't enough to be angry. I needed to be prepared. That afternoon, I stepped out for air. Just needed to breathe. As I reached into my purse for sunglasses, my fingers brushed against soft linen. The swan napkin. Still folded. Still white. Still pretending to mean something. It had felt sweet before. Now it felt placed. Planted. Had it always been part of the script? I didn't cry. I didn't curse. But as I walked back inside, I passed a photo frame in the hallway. Seren's graduation. Everyone was there. Mom, Dad, Aunt Linda, even our old dog. I wasn't in it, not even in the background. I opened the study, knelt in front of the safe, and entered my real code, the one only I knew, just to see if they'd changed it. They hadn't, because they thought I was done checking. Then I opened the internal logs. Last biometric access. Maris Layla, 6 days ago. But right below it, access at 3:14 p.m. Thumbprint. Amelia Layla. My mother. The one who said she hadn't stepped inside that room in years. So if she was never in that room, why did the system register her fingerprint at 3:14 p.m.? I sat there, motionless, staring at the log like it might change if I blinked enough. The cursor blinked back at me, steady and cruel. I didn't move, didn't speak. My breath was shallow, caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. Then I stood up slowly and walked to the guest room, my old sanctuary, now my private workspace. Sunlight filtered in through the thin curtains, casting soft lines on the hardwood floor. It smelled faintly of lavender and printer ink. I closed the door behind me, locked it. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to ask for them anymore. I'd find them. The fingerprint log was still open on my tablet, and I scrolled to the security feed history. Someone had deleted footage from the hallway camera outside this room. Not the whole day, just a 20-minute window, right before the supposed accident, right before Calder's phone call. I launched my recovery software. A few fragments loaded. Most of it was corrupt, but 2 short clips played without issue. The first one, Calder walking down the hallway toward my office, alone. The second one, something shifted. Same hallway. 2 figures. Calder was there. But behind him, half a step, mostly in shadow, a woman. Slim frame. Hair pulled back. Careful. She didn't speak, didn't rush, just followed. It wasn't Seren, and it damn sure wasn't the housekeeper. It was my mother. I paused the footage, zoomed in. It wasn't the clearest shot, but I'd know that frame anywhere. The slight limp in her left foot. The way she always clutched the hem of her cardigan like she didn't trust the sleeves. I stared at her face frozen on the screen. You were in that hallway, Mom, and you lied. But how? How had she pressed her thumb to the scanner? Her joints were stiff, barely able to open a pill bottle. Unless, no, someone helped her. Or worse, someone lifted her print. Off a teacup, a glass, something she touched often. I rubbed my temples. My jaw was aching from clenching too long. Then I opened the drawer beneath my desk, the one I kept locked. My backup documents, business filings, old client contracts, all there. But something was off. Things weren't stacked like I left them. I reached for the green folder labeled FAME-POA Estate. Gone. That folder held my signed power of attorney documents, my legal claim over certain family assets. It wasn't just about the money. It was the paper trail I'd kept quiet for years, the one that ensured nobody could touch what I'd built without me knowing. Only 3 people knew that folder existed, let alone where I kept it, and all 3 of them were under this roof. I opened the top right drawer where I hid my backup key. Still there, which meant someone didn't need to break in. They already had access. I sat back, breath short. This wasn't sloppy. This was calculated, and the part that broke me wasn't the breach of trust, it was how casually they moved through it. Like I was a stepping stone. I needed to look her in the eye. So I went to her room, knocked once, then stepped inside. She was sitting in her recliner, knitting something, blue, maybe a scarf. The TV was on mute. "Oh, honey," she said, surprised but calm. "Need something?" "I thought we'd talk," I replied. My voice was even, practiced. "Of course." She smiled and reached for the kettle on her side table. "I just made tea. Want some?" I watched her hands, delicate, a little swollen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she poured. She couldn't press a scanner without help. She handed me a cup. Chamomile. "You know," she said softly, "this family, we've always stuck together, no matter what." I didn't answer. I just looked around her room. Everything was neatly arranged. Books, photos, a few knickknacks. Then I saw it, on the vanity. A file folder. Green, my initials on the spine. She saw me notice. "Oh," she said lightly, "I borrowed that. Didn't think you'd mind. Just wanted to see what you've been working on." I smiled tightly. "Sure." I left the room without another word. Back in my office, I shut the door behind me and took a breath. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. Not anymore. I crossed to the bookshelf and reached for the old law book with the red spine. Civil Code, 1989 edition. Pulled it forward, revealing the second safe. Smaller. Built into the wall. It wasn't latched. I paused. Slowly opened the door. Inside, everything looked untouched. Until I saw the empty slot where the estate file used to sit. That file wasn't just legal paperwork. It was the one thing they should have never seen. The moment I saw the gap in the second safe, I knew what was missing. I didn't need to triple check. My hands hovered over the edge of the shelf, but I didn't reach in. I'd spent years preparing that document, longer still protecting it, and now it was gone. Golden light filtered in through the slats of the blinds, streaking across the floor like prison bars. Outside, the neighborhood was still. I could hear kids laughing down the block and the occasional buzz of a lawn trimmer, but inside it felt like time had slowed, like the walls were listening. I walked slowly to my desk and sat down. The air in the room felt different, warmer somehow, like whatever innocence was left in this house had quietly evaporated. I opened my laptop, typed in the passcode. It took me just a few seconds to confirm what I already feared. The missing file. Redline Trust Addendum. Private POA override. My scanned copy was still saved in my encrypted folder, but the original notarized paper version was gone. That addendum was the only legally binding clause that protected my assets and rights in case of manipulation or coordinated fraud from any family member. And my father had signed it himself, in his hospital bed, 2 weeks after his first stroke. They weren't supposed to even know it existed. But they knew, and they took it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blinking cursor. The silence was broken by the sound of something small shifting inside the top drawer. I pulled it open. My smart pen. I'd forgotten it was there. When I lifted it, a tiny red light blinked to life. A voice filled the room, low and close, like someone whispering too close to a closed door. "She'll never forgive us, Calder." It was my mother. Then Calder's voice, flat. "She'll never find out, unless she checks that damn document." My grip tightened around the pen. They'd sat in this room, in my chair, whispering like it was just another errand to steal from me, as if betrayal were as routine as grocery shopping. I rewound it, played it again. Not a single word of hesitation. No fear, just quiet, calculated intent. They knew exactly what they were doing. I sat there in the growing dusk, the sound of their voices lingering. Then I remembered the alert from this morning. My inbox had a flagged message from my lawyer, sent at 6:03 a.m. while I was still on the plane back from Tokyo. Subject line: "Did you authorize release of DocX override file?" No, I didn't. And that meant the clause I'd hidden in that document had worked. If anyone accessed the safe without my consent and removed it, it would trigger a silent alert, one that wouldn't show up on any household device. I pulled up our secure communication app. My lawyer had already begun preparing a freeze order. They didn't know that. They thought they'd won. But the thing is, when you spend most of your life being underestimated, people forget that silence is a strategy. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. 1 second after another. Then I closed my eyes and thought back to a Thanksgiving 6 years ago. I'd flown in early, cooked the entire meal myself. Turkey, stuffing, everything from scratch. I set the table, poured the wine. That night, my father stood up with a glass raised high and toasted to my sister Seren. "The backbone of this family," he'd said. My mother had leaned in and kissed his temple. They never even mentioned my name, just a nod. That's all I got. Back then, I brushed it off. Tonight, it hit differently. I was never one of them. I was their safety net, the backup plan, the one they only called when they needed a cleanup. And now I was cleaning up again. I glanced at the bookshelf, the law books that covered the safe. One of them was upside down. It was a small detail, subtle, but it was something Dad used to do during tax season. He'd mark which binder had something hidden in it by placing it upside down. He taught me that. Now they were using it against me. I stood up and paced the room. This wasn't about the 9 million. Not really. I'd made that back before. I'd make it again. What cut deep wasn't the money. It was realizing love here always had terms and conditions. I opened the drawer again. The swan napkin was back, folded neatly. I hadn't returned it there. Last I saw it, it was in my mother's room. And before that, it was in my bag, tucked there by her before my trip, like a decoy. I unfolded it slowly, then refolded it tighter, smaller, till it was no bigger than a coin. My laptop screen had gone dark. I tapped it awake, opened a new email, typed 3 words, subject, execute plan C, send. The email was sent. I watched the screen for a moment longer, half hoping someone on the other side of that message would pick up on the silent alarm I'd just sounded. But silence. That's all there was. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the weight of the day settle into my bones. The sky outside had turned dark, the last bits of golden light disappearing behind the blinds. I moved to the kitchen, one hand on the counter, the other still curled from where it had gripped the edge of the desk too long. The condo was quiet, too quiet, but that was exactly how I needed it. By the time I had the roast in the oven and the table set for 4, I'd gone over everything I needed to say, and everything I wouldn't. I invited them under the pretense of peace. But what I really wanted was the truth. Not the version wrapped in smiles and platitudes. The truth that hides behind flickering eyes and a second too long before answering. They arrived on time. Of course they did. Calder first, always early, always acting like he had nothing to prove. Then Dad and Mom together. She clutched his arm like they were some inseparable team, like I hadn't seen the footage, like I didn't know. "Smells amazing in here," Dad said, stepping in. I smiled, just like old times. He nodded, and for a second, I thought he believed it. The table was set with care, napkins folded into swans. Their favorites, beef tenderloin, asparagus with garlic butter, warm bread. I poured the wine slowly, making eye contact with each of them. They all smiled back. Small talk filled the first 20 minutes. The weather, the traffic, Calder's new property investment out in Pasadena. My mother complimented the bread, said it tasted like the ones from that French bakery we used to visit after church. All of it. Polite, polished, fake. Then I said it. Remember that time when we were kids and I found the code to the safe scribbled on the back of a grocery list? Calder froze, fork halfway to his mouth. My father gave a dry chuckle. That old thing. You had a knack for finding things. I smiled at him, but only with my lips. Yeah. I remember thinking back then, some things weren't meant to be found, but maybe some things were left out in the open for a reason. My mother didn't say a word, just sipped her wine, and kept sipping. I cut into my meat and let the silence stretch. Then Calder, ever the fixer, cleared his throat. So, Maris, what's been keeping you busy these days? Business trip went well? I nodded, calmly. Productive. And I had a meeting with my lawyer this morning. All three of them looked up. Just routine, I continued. We went over a few triggers in the estate protections, in case anything unusual were to happen. I turned toward my mother. She dropped her fork. It hit the plate so hard it echoed. She scrambled to pick it up, mumbling something about Butterfingers, but I saw her face. I saw everything. That tiny fracture of composure. That's what I'd come for. I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back and watched them fidget. My father suddenly found his napkin very interesting. Calder was chewing slower than before, eyes darting toward Mom. I wasn't accusing. I wasn't threatening. I was just mentioning. But it was enough. I topped off everyone's wine, then raised my glass. To family, I said. To the things we don't say out loud. The secrets we carry, the ones we think protect us, or maybe the ones that just hold us hostage. No one moved. The clink I expected never came. I set my glass down without drinking. I had one more thing to see. Her brooch. She wore it tonight. The same silver and pearl pin she wore the Thanksgiving. I announced my engagement, and no one said a word. No congratulations. No questions. And just a nod from Dad. Seren changed the subject. Calder was texting. Mom had just kept eating. I remember that brooch more than I remember the turkey. Tonight, it sat on her collarbone like a quiet reminder that no matter how loud I screamed for their approval, they never planned on hearing it. When dinner ended, I stood up and started clearing the plates. No one offered to help until Mom finally stood and reached for a dish. Let me... I cut her off. Don't worry, Mom. I looked right at her. Not angry, not raised voice. Just done. You've done enough. She didn't move. Neither did I. Then I turned toward the kitchen, one dish in each hand, and walked away. Behind me, the sound of shoes shuffling on hardwood. But no one said anything. They didn't get the message. So next time, I'd say it louder. 2 mornings passed. Long, quiet, deliberate mornings. I gave them space. Gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they needed time to face what they'd done. Maybe shame worked slowly in people like them. It didn't. Not a call, not a knock on my door, not a single word acknowledging anything. So I dressed in slate gray, the same shade I wore the day I buried my uncle. Cold, still, unflinching. I wasn't mourning them. But something had died. Whatever part of me that still held out hope for repair, it was gone. Silas's office was on the 4th floor of an old brick building with no elevator. Appropriate, really. You had to climb for justice here. He met me in the hallway with a face that didn't look like his own. Drawn, uncomfortable, too careful. Maris, he said, we need to talk. In private. That's never good. I followed him in, sat in the stiff leather chair across from his desk, and waited. He didn't ease into it. "Your father and Calder filed documents last week, changes to the trust. You've been removed as beneficiary." My ears rang. I wasn't sure if it was the air conditioning or just blood pressure. "You're sure?" "They used what appears to be your signature on a mutual release form," he said, "but it's dated the day before you returned to the U.S. That alone throws red flags." I said nothing. He continued, "We've already started an internal investigation, but the documents were signed, notarized, and pushed through the system, efficiently. Too efficiently." "What about the override clause?" I asked, voice flat. He gave a slow nod. "Still holds. They can move the money, but if we can prove misconduct, the clause reinstates everything. We'll need to act fast." I stood, not trusting my body to stay steady if I sat any longer. "Do it." Walking back to my car felt like crossing a desert. Every step burned, but nothing showed on my face. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just replayed their dinner faces, calm, pretending, not a flicker of remorse. That night, I poured a glass of water, opened my laptop, and checked email. There was one new message, no subject, no sender, just a link. I stared at it for a long time. Then I clicked. The video was dark and grainy, but the voices, crystal clear. Calder's laugh. "That was too easy. She gave it up like a puppy, wagging her tail." Then my father. "She's always been soft. Won't do a damn thing." And Calder again, pouring himself another drink. "If she finds out, what's she gonna do? Cry to Mom?" Laughter. Mine didn't join. I closed the laptop, stood still in the middle of my living room, and listened to the silence around me. There was a time I would have sobbed, begged for answers. Now, I walked calmly to my desk, pulled out 2 external drives, and copied the video file. One for Silas, one for me. Then I reached for my phone. "Silas," I said when he answered. "Get me a court date." The rest of the evening unfolded slowly. I didn't blast music. I didn't break dishes. I didn't even call a friend. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. My old sketchbook. The cover was cracked, pages slightly yellowed. Last time I held it, I was 24. Back then, I wanted to design furniture. I told Calder once, after a few glasses of wine at Thanksgiving. He laughed and called it cute. I never opened the book again. Until now. I flipped to a blank page, picked up a pencil, and started sketching. Not furniture. A room. 3 chairs. Only one occupied. Mine. Courtroom lighting. Long shadows. I didn't draw my family. They weren't the focus anymore. I was. That's when it really hit me. What they stole wasn't just money. It wasn't even just trust. It was the years I spent thinking I had to earn a place I was born into. And they knew that. They counted on it. But they forgot something. I don't break the same way twice. They thought they'd erased me, but I wasn't done. They'd signed the papers. Now, I'd write the ending. A week later, I walked into the courthouse without shaking. The sky outside was overcast, but inside me, it was sharp, clear, like ice water running through my veins. No more pleading, no more waiting for decency to show up in people who'd long since traded it for comfort and control. Silas met me at the bottom of the courthouse steps. His face didn't need to say anything. I already knew we were walking into a storm, but I wasn't afraid of lightning anymore. Courtrooms have a strange quiet, not peaceful, just contained, like everyone's pretending not to watch a fire slowly building in the middle of the room. My parents were already seated. Saren sat between them, lips pressed thin, arms folded. Calder stood near their lawyer, tapping his foot like he was waiting for a haircut, not a reckoning. He glanced my way, smirked. I didn't give him the satisfaction of looking back. We took our seats. The judge, a woman in her late 50s, steel gray suit, no-nonsense tone, called the session to order. Silas stood first, calm, focused. He presented the timeline, my international travel, the fraudulent signature filed during my absence, the override clause they hoped no one would check. His voice didn't waver. Every point struck the air like a nail hitting wood. I watched my father shift in his seat. Not much, just enough to know it was landing. Then Calder stood. His lawyer slid a stack of papers toward the judge with the confidence of someone tossing down a royal flush. "This is an email thread," the attorney began, showing Ms. Layla's written consent to gift the funds to her family, stating she wanted to make amends for past emotional damages. Silas frowned. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Layla, did you write these emails?" I looked down at the pages in front of me. The font matched mine, the phrasing, almost believable, but I never wrote them. "I did not," I said plainly. My voice didn't rise, my chest didn't tighten. I just stared directly at Calder, who gave the smallest shrug, like he'd expected this, like it was already handled. The judge nodded. "We'll examine metadata. Continue." And that was it. That's how fast years of fighting for a place in this family could be erased, with a printed lie and a crooked smile. I stood. I'd like to step outside. No one stopped me. The hallway outside was colder than I remembered. I made my way down the marble stairs, out the heavy front doors, and walked 4 blocks before I knew where I was going. Same coffee shop I went to years ago, after Calder told me I'd never be taken seriously if I cried at the table. Back then, I did. Sat in the corner, tears rolling into a latte, wondering what it would take to feel like I mattered. This time. I ordered a black coffee, sat by the window, and stared at the world like it owed me nothing. But I owed myself everything. At the next table, a young woman was sketching. Her hand moved slow, confident. Charcoal pencil, loose lines, not perfect, but honest. I glanced at my phone, opened the image I'd drawn a week ago. One chair, mine. Then, something shifted. I opened the sketch app again and drew a second figure. Calder. But I drew him walking away, not toward me. Back turned. Alone. Let him fake my voice. Let him pretend I was weak. He forgot something. My real voice wasn't written in emails. It was in court filings. In every line of every trust clause he didn't read. In the fact that I showed up, again, and didn't break. They thought I'd be too hurt to move, too humiliated to fight. But I've lived most of my life carrying disappointment like a second coat. This was just weather, and I'd packed my own umbrella. They forged a story. Now, I'd expose the truth. I spent the night in near silence. No TV, no music, just the hum of the fridge, and my mind clicking through every moment like a tape being rewound and cued. At 7 the next morning, I was at Silas's office. He opened the door himself, sleeves already rolled, tie loosened. He didn't ask how I slept. He knew. We walked into the private conference room, wood-paneled, soundproofed, a single lamp in the corner casting gold onto the table. "I hope you brought it," he said. I reached into my bag, pulled out a slim black drive. "Not just this," I replied. "I brought the receipts." He connected it to his laptop, and within seconds, the video from Dubai loaded. A hotel room, me sitting at a desk, speaking directly to a U.S. consulate staffer. I, Maris Layla, am pre-registering the access code to my personal estate safe. I am also issuing this signed declaration that no party, including family, is authorized to retrieve any physical documents or currency without my explicit written consent. The timestamp was 2 days before Calder claimed I'd gifted him the money. Silas leaned back. They dug their own grave. Then I opened the second folder. the one labeled "From Noor." My business partner Noor had met with Calder weeks ago. He thought she was a crypto consultant. What he didn't know was she'd been recording. I clicked play. Calder's voice came through, smug as ever. "I just need a clean trail, you know. Something to show she gave consent. Doesn't have to be real, just convincing. A fabricated email chain. Shouldn't be hard." Noor's voice, steady. "And payment? Up front. In coin. I don't want it traceable." Silas didn't blink. "We'll file this morning. Emergency hearing." By 10, we were back at the courthouse. Not the big courtroom, an annex room off to the side. No press. No pomp, just precision. Calder looked surprised to see me. Maybe he thought I'd crawl under a rock and disappear. He smiled, like this was still a game. I didn't return it. The judge entered. "We're here for a supplemental motion based on newly introduced evidence." Silas stood and cued the video. Calder's smile cracked. By the time Noor's recording played, his hands were shaking. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Let their own words hang in the air like smoke after a fire. The judge didn't yell. She didn't scold. She simply set her pen down and said, "A separate date will be scheduled to address criminal matters." No one said a word. Later that night, I drove to the family house. It wasn't planned. It was instinct. Closure, maybe. I parked a block away, walked past the familiar hedges, and let myself in without knocking. Calder's voice boomed from the den. "You said she wouldn't show." "You told me she was still in Dubai." My father grumbled something about misunderstandings. I stepped into the doorway of the kitchen. My mother sat at the table, silent. Same kitchen where she'd once faked an ER visit to steal from me. She didn't look up. I didn't lash out. I just said, "It was never about the money." They went quiet. It was about proving I wasn't the weak one. I turned to leave, but something on the hallway wall caught my eye. A framed sketch, one I drew in college. A girl standing alone under a tree. I'd forgotten it even existed. They used to laugh at it. Now it hung in their house. I took it off the wall. As I walked to the door, my mother's voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. "You always were better than them." I didn't stop. I didn't say thank you. I just opened the front door and stepped out into the night, holding a piece of myself they never valued. Until now. The courtroom was just the beginning. What came after? That was justice. They lost more than money. They lost their mask. And I walked away before the dust even settled. It had been 2 months. 2 months since the courtroom. 2 months since Calder's face turned from smug to ash. 2 months since I stood in that kitchen doorway and told them I wasn't the weak one. I hadn't seen them since. But today, I stood on their front porch one last time, folder in hand. I knocked out of formality, not need. The door creaked open. My father stood there, thinner, slower, a grayness in his skin that hadn't been there before. Time had finally caught up to him. Or maybe guilt did. Hard to tell the difference with him. "I came to deliver this," I said, holding out the envelope. He looked at it like it might bite him. "What is it?" "Power of attorney. For your medical care. I signed it over to a legal guardian. You'll be looked after. But not by me." His lips parted, but no sound came out. No apology. Not even a thank you. I stepped inside without waiting for permission. The house smelled the same. Lavender, wood polish, and something stale underneath. A kind of silence that stuck to your skin. Mom wasn't there. No sign of Calder. Not that I expected him. I set the folder on the kitchen table. Same table where they once laughed about my dreams, where they plotted behind my back, where Mom once pretended to be dying. "I won't be back," I said flatly. "But I won't keep you from getting care." He didn't argue. He just sat down, like all the fight had leaked out of him. As I turned to go, something stopped me. A drawer near the fridge was half open. Something inside caught the light. I pulled it open. Inside was a small Ziploc bag, neatly sealed. Inside it, a crumpled napkin, flattened carefully now, folded into a leaf. My leaf. The one I made in second grade that he crushed in his hand and threw away because I was wasting time. He'd kept it all these years. Or maybe not all these years. Maybe just recently. Maybe guilt made him dig through the past. I placed it gently on the table, beside the folder. Didn't say a word. No need. Let silence say it. Later that afternoon, I sat alone in a small cafe near the courthouse. A TV mounted in the corner scrolled headlines in silence. Calder Dorsey indicted on 6 counts of fraud. I didn't flinch. Didn't smile. Didn't feel anything loud. Just settled. My tea was still warm. A young waitress approached, refilling my cup. She hesitated, then leaned in. "Sorry to ask," she said quietly, "but are you the woman from that family case?" I met her eyes. They were kind, curious, a little afraid. "I was," I said. "But I'm not anymore." She paused, biting her lip. "My stepdad, he's like that too. Makes you feel crazy, like nothing you do is ever right." I reached into my purse, pulled out a clean napkin, and folded it without thinking. Handed it to her. "Here," I said. "You write your own code, and never share it." She smiled like it hurt. I didn't ask her name. Didn't need to. We all know that look. We've all had to survive something. I finished my tea, tucked a tip under the cup, and left. Outside, the wind had picked up. Cool, not cold. The kind of breeze that brushes your skin and whispers, "You're free now." I walked 3 blocks to the train station. At a crosswalk, I paused, adjusting my bag. Inside it, tucked between my passport and a notepad, was a folded piece of paper. My sketch, the one they once mocked, the one I almost threw away. Not anymore. This time I kept it. You don't always get revenge. Sometimes, you just get free.